Hi there! So if you're watching this video, it's probably because you're kind of curious about the title and you're wondering what it's doing here. For starters, my name is Pia. I'm a philosophy student, but I'm also a teacher. But I think the most relevant detail for what I'm going to say today is that I'm the type of person who ends up listening to the problems of a lot of people, which is great. I mean, I'm very honored and very happy to be able to create that sort of space where people can just feel like they can say whatever they want without being interrupted or judged, and they can figure themselves out. I really think listening non-judgmentally is going to save the world. That's not what I'm going to talk about today, but I just wanted to put that in there. So what I actually wanted to share today is something that's been changing the way I listen to people and changing the way I help them, or better, changing the way I help them help themselves. And I think it's going to keep changing that. And that's what St. Thomas Aquinas thinks about the emotions. Don't turn me off. It's actually interesting, I promise. So, who is this talk for? I think you could say it's for friends. It's for anybody who has the privilege of having someone's trust and is able to listen to them. So it could be for a teenager helping another teenager, or an adult helping another adult, or an adult helping a child or a teenager helping an adult. You never know, it could happen. Before we go to St. Thomas, let's start with this. Sometimes we're a mess. And when I say we're a mess, that usually means something along the lines of I'm going haywire. My feelings are all over the place. Everything's overwhelming. I don't know what's happening to me. Everything's just one big wave, and I'd like to be able to take it apart, but really it's too much of it. Another version of the mess is that you react badly, or people tell you react badly, so you feel guilty. You also feel guilty about the first haywire bit, by the way. And so this reacting badly, it's usually something like anger or jealousy. That's usually what we mean when we say we're reacting badly. And I'd really want to not be angry or jealous, but sometimes it just explode. Another version of the mess is sometimes it's just fear and anxiety, and other times it's just sadness. We really just don't know why, but we're just sad. So, what does St. Thomas have to do with all of this? Let's start from the fact that St. Thomas said, okay, when you look at the human person, we notice two things. We know and we want. So let's focus on those two activities, knowing things and wanting things. These activities tell us that inside us there are certain powers. When you know, you can know intellectually or also sensibly, and when you want, you can also want intellectually and sensibly. So let's call the first part intellectual or sensible knowledge, with your intellect, and the second one, wanting, let's call them desires, although St. Thomas calls them something else. He calls them appetite, but let's use desires. And I think one of the most interesting things is that St. Thomas manages to explain feelings along these two lines. And when he does it, feelings don't really seem like a huge mess anymore. They actually start kind of making sense. So let's start with the desires. They're the ones that usually generate all these feelings, but they do so in cooperation with what we know. So if you have your desires respond to two sort of things, good and evil. Surprise. So, according to St. Thomas, what are the emotions? Emotions are when your desire moves in cooperation with what it knows about this good or about this evil. So, if you have good and you see it as good, you know it as good, whether through your mind or through your senses, your imagination, what you feel at that moment, like when that moment of, oh, I want this, is love. So the next semi-step is you know it as good, but you realize you don't have it yet, but you feel this desire. So love and desire work together to make you try to get that good, and when you actually possess it, what you feel is joy. So we have here in the movement of your desires, realizing something is good, realizing you don't have it, so trying to move towards it, and actually gaining it, possessing it. You have three different emotions already, and these are usually the positive emotions that we want, that we seek: love, desire, and joy. Alright, but what about evil? So, when you know something is evil, or you imagine it to be evil, what you usually feel is hate. Not hate, intense hatred. It's just like it's the term St. Thomas uses to refer to when your desire is shaped such that you don't want this. Then when you realize that the evil is kind of like possible for you, what you feel is aversion. You want to avoid it. And then if the evil actually comes, what you feel is sorrow.
So you have three other basic emotions here. You have hate, aversion or avoidance, and sorrow. And their response to evil. The interesting thing is this evil is sometimes the absence of a good. When you lose something, you feel sad. When you had to do something that's taking away the free time that you wanted, you feel sad too. Now, these are not the only emotions that St. Thomas identified. He also has an explanation for other interesting emotions. He says that we're capable of knowing that something is good in the future, difficult to get but possible. When we see something that way, what you feel is hope. Now, when you feel something as good, future, difficult, and impossible, what you feel is despair. Now, the other emotions are also really interesting. You look at something as evil, but it's difficult to avoid and impossible, or very little chance of avoiding it. What you feel is fear, which makes you want to go away from it. And then when you see that evil, and you know it's difficult to avoid, but you kind of think there's a chance, what you feel is daring. And then the last emotion is very complex. It's anger. And why is it complex? Because St. Thomas says that with anger, you see the evil that's present and you see how it's an obstacle to a good you love. So you feel anger because you see something precisely as an obstacle and you want to overcome it. So anger usually makes you overcome it to get to that good you want. So these are very clean lines to explain what we feel, and life can be a lot more complex than this. Well, yeah, but it's interesting to see this basic structure because also it has a space to explain why we can have many conflicting feelings, because it depends on what we see as good and what we see as evil. You can even have conflicting feelings towards the same thing. For instance, achievement, doing well in your studies or doing well in your job. It could be something you see as good, and so you feel love and desire for it. But at the same time, you could see it as a threat because it makes you feel kind of insecure when you don't manage to reach the goals you set. And so sometimes you feel despair or fear. So you either beat yourself up and are too hard on yourself when you don't achieve, or you don't take chances in things that could be great because you're so afraid of failure. You just don't do your best, just that you don't feel the bite of failure. In other words, it's possible to explain even ambivalent emotions with what St. Thomas says. But perhaps the most interesting thing about St. Thomas's theory, he doesn't say that anger and sadness and fear are bad. He says all of these are rooted in love. Even fear, even anger, even sadness. Fear is caused by you loving something and being afraid to lose it. Loving your free time maybe and being afraid to lose it. Loving your reputation and being afraid to lose it. Loving a friend, being afraid to lose it. Sadness is also caused by love because you love something and you don't have it. And anger is also caused by love because you see something good and you want it, but you see an obstacle to it. When you love the right loves, then anger, sadness, and fear can help you seek, keep, and fight for what you love. That being said, all the emotions can actually make sense depending on what you love. And all the emotions can actually be good or not so good or evil, depending on what you love. The secret is really, what are the things you love?
Feelings tell you what you love. That's why they're not your enemies. So, what's the deal? Well, you don't get to personally grow in maturity or in virtue by suffocating your feelings or by not listening to them. Feelings are important, like we said, because they tell you what you love. There are, however, a few things that you should be asking yourself. Does what I love fulfill me? Do the things I love help me be a better person? Is what I love worth it? Achievement is great, but sometimes in all your struggle to keep on getting all the credentials necessary to get the best university or a great job, it's just frankly draining. Sometimes you ask yourself, there's gotta be bigger reasons for doing my best, aside from just doing my best. Sometimes when we go haywire, it's really because there are lots of loves conflicting in us. Okay, maybe you knew that. Maybe you didn't really need this talk to tell you that. Other times you get overwhelmed because you put importance in something like your capacity to do things well that's actually pretty limited. So in my own struggling, one of the things I figured out is that the best way to resolve conflicts between what I love or a troublesome little love or something some unhealthy hang-up is to go through the process of reevaluating and fitting all these little loves into a much bigger love. And this is necessary because of the different levels of how we can know and want something. Things feelings can fall more on the sensitive gradient or on the spiritual gradient. Now, there is no split between body and soul. We are meant to love with all that we are. But some things tug more at our immediate senses, and they're not always what we really want. And that's why it's important to go through the process of fitting things into a bigger picture or reevaluating, because we could be so focused on something good, but miss out on something great. So for example, you could be more concerned about Instagram likes and be playing with so many filters to try to get the perfect picture, but you might not notice like the friend in the same room who might want to have a heart-to-heart conversation, and sometimes it's really great just to have one of those deep talks with your friends. Or you could be really excited and craving those brownies that your sister is baking, but have a totally different attitude to communion. So the strongest and most vivid feelings, like for example, anger at your elder brother, don't really tell you what you really love, don't always tell you what you really love, or what's really worth loving. They just tell you what's hot and relevant for you at the moment, but not what you really want in the long run. As you grow and work on processing and reevaluating things, you could actually feel for things like heart-to-heart conversations or communion too. So on one hand, if you feel like you don't love something that could be good, don't give up. You're not being a hypocrite. Have hope that if you keep reevaluating and choosing, you'll eventually get there. So going back to conflicts and unhealthy hang-ups, the solution is not to go cold turkey. Not always anyway. It's to find that bigger love that is going to help you reorient yourself and your feelings. Your heart is meant to love something. It's not going to last in your resolve to get over a bad habit or a troublesome hang-up if it doesn't find that bigger love that fills it. What is that bigger love? Well, the answer has to be yours. You had to be the one to find it. And if you're someone who is helping someone figure things out at the moment, it is true that sometimes you can give answers and you have to give answers, but other times, more than telling someone, bam, this is it, you have to let them discover things for themselves so that they can make the really important answers their own. Be assured with this though, your heart is meant to be happy. God wants you happy and wants you to feel it too. I wanted to end by asking you to imagine something. So imagine you're with your best friends, or you're with someone who really loves you and whom you also love, or with your family. And just imagine that feeling of peace and security and really just that joy of having a good time with the people you love, even if it's not anything like super exciting. It's just the joy of being with them, enjoying being with somebody you love and whom you know loves you. Okay, now imagine if you could feel the same thing sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament. It's possible, and it's the most real thing there is. Thanks for listening.